Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Let's Talk. Once again, I have Hugh Evans from the northern Columbus area of Ohio. And today the topic of conversation is going to be basically racism, and for that matter, systemic racism, basically our thoughts and opinions and whether there's any difference in opinion or not. It is what it is. If we don't differ in opinion, so be it. We're just a couple of idiots having a discussion.
Couple of white guys telling everyone what they need to know about racism.
Yes, good point. Do we need to acknowledge or check our white male privilege?
I don't think we have to this time. I think if we're gonna have an honest discussion about race in general, kind of needs to be a dialogue from all races involved, right?
Well, I think whether we're being snarky or we're being truthful or a healthy blending of the two, there's some areas here in North Carolina where you can definitely get the distinct impression of some exceptional waspiness. And if I'm not mistaken, I do recall there was some areas like that in Ohio. What was it, Powell? Am I saying that right? Is it Powell?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, really, even where I am, I would say, well, all right, you know what, where I am, it's a little bit more diverse. We have that going on. We actually have something that's closer to like a proper representative portion of diversity in general. But yeah, if you get up towards like Powell, Dublin, Worthington, like anywhere up in that northern segment, it's yeah,
pretty whitewashed.
You could call it the wasp's nest if you wanted. Like,
yeah, I say that somewhat whimsically because I held a job at a gym for about 6 weeks in this town called Cary in the greater Raleigh area. Now, Cary has been affectionately named two things: Consolidated Area Relocated Yankees, or Containment Area Relocated Yankees. And I worked at this gym whose name I'll leave out of this because God forbid this is the video of all videos that goes viral, right?
of course.
Then the gym is like trying to sue me for, some sort of infringement or whatnot. I want to get my clock thing here going. All right, I set a 45-minute timer, so at least when that goes off, we'll know it's time to wrap things up. I'm going to try to keep these between the two of us to about an hour. Back to the gym. I feel like if I use the name of the road that it was on, that could be a dead giveaway. But suffice to say, it was in a strip mall, and the strip mall itself was very, very waspy, almost to the point where the people there may have had some legitimate guilt of their own. And I got the distinct impression of wokeness. One quick little story before we move forward. I went to a Subway, and I think it was owned by, I want to say, Middle Easterners. Not that that's a big deal, but clearly English was not the first language. Otherwise, where they came from was not a big deal to me. But one of the things I've been trying to do is instill in my son proper etiquette, proper, social behaviors. Yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, not yeah, no, how to conduct yourself accordingly, trying to raise a gentleman. And the guy behind the counter was like getting pissy with me, like, oh, that's not necessary, we don't need to do that. And I'm like, I was like, well, excuse me, sir, I'll take it upon myself to raise my son. And I'm trying to be polite. I'm trying to, like, look, man, I'm just trying to order a sandwich. Leave it to me to raise my son, not the sandwich maker. And I'm not putting the guy down like, because he's a sandwich maker. For all I know, he could have been the owner of that franchise. That's not the point. The point is, stay in your goddamn lane.
Yeah.
I see a cat in the background. If it's not a pet and it's actually part of a ranch where you and your wife eat cats, okay, weird, not my thing, but, you do you, whatever, who cares? So, growing up in the 90s, I remember this really big push. A lot of exposure to what was going on the West Coast. And a lot of it was due to West Coast rap or hip hop. Please excuse me if I don't know the colloquial difference between rap and hip hop, but I remember a lot of that from like the late 90s or the late 80s with NWA, and then all the subsequent artists that came out of the West Coast uh, were, for all intents and purposes, rapping about their experiences. We'll just leave it at that. And it brought to light, maybe certain social issues, if you will, potentially. And I feel like because the music, and whether it was the message or the music or because fuck the police, that was a big deal. It was controversial. It was ooh.
Oh yeah, people were freaked out. I mean, gangster rap in general. There is like I would describe it as like a moderate suburban panic, like of what do we do with this? Are our kids going to be idolizing everyone from like the whole gangsta scene? Are they going to be? Is my child going to be going around popping caps? Is this something I need to be
Right.
concerned? Like I remember things on the news where you'd have like concerned parents gathering up CDs and driving them over with like steamrollers. It was it was a whole thing.
And the funny thing is that was all started by the metal market with Tipper Gore, the wife
Yes.
of a major Democrat. Again, you see what my confirmation bias does to me?
Yeah, but at least you're aware of it. But I don't think that was. I mean, not to like take us off on another direction. We could hit on like the whole free speech thing sometime too. But that whole thing of like what was up with Tipper Gore and everything really being led by the Democrats of like you know
Morality.
where exactly they were playing the moral card then. It's one of those things where it was another angle, but um, oh, especially when you get into I mean those hearings in general were incredible, and the fact that D. Snyder of all people probably gave the best
Yeah.
testimony on it, fantastic.
Well, in or about that same time, you also have you have the emergence of West Coast gangster rap and some of the messaging and the narrative. Ice-T also in that time period did his heavy metal project Body Count, and you also had the whole Rodney King thing. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. There's a 4-year difference between us.
Uh, yeah, was it 4 or 5? I was born in '81,
Okay, so I was in
so
high school from 90 to 94.
okay, and I graduated in 2000, so we're right, yeah,
Okay, so
we're
you
five
were in
years
high
there.
school from 96 to 2000?
96. Yep.
Okay, so you might not have been at a level to be quite cognizant of all these things, but I was in high school for the whole Rodney King thing. I had graduated high school for OJ, but between junior high, or what they call middle school now, and high school, I remember those things. I remember the Malcolm X push, and then it got such a big push. Then they made a movie with Denzel Washington. I remember the big pro-black movement. And once Clinton was elected, he did the whole it's no longer black or white, it's Caucasian and African American, which if I want to be one of these uber snowflake triggered, sensitive people, I could be like, okay, well, I can find Africa on the map, as well as depending on the map, I can see the multiple countries within the continent of Africa. I can't find the continent of Caucasia.
Well, all right. As long as we're on the topic of race, are you familiar with how things happened with the term Caucasian in the first place?
Are you referring to Pangea, Caucasoid, Mongoloid, Negroid?
Oh no, it's even weird. I'm talking about like, especially late 19th century, early 20th century in the U.S. and what the purpose of that term really was.
Enlighten me.
All right. So early it term your population. Then it moved on to other ethnic groups. So, for example, we had a whole bunch of people that came over from China and were working especially on railroad development. All of that was happening. and enough of them came in that we decided, all right, you know what? Let's go ahead and include them in Caucasian. And so it was this expanding definition of groups that were okay and that were considered to be what we wanted is, more of our desirable majority. And that's what it grew into. So if you go into what someone would have referred to as Caucasian 100 years ago, it wouldn't match up with what it is now, where it's synonymous with white, if we're
Yeah.
being honest about it. But that it actually was nothing other than a classification tool and saying who was more desirable, who deserved to have more rights and freedoms. And it's an interesting little tidbit of history. I think I actually picked that up in my sociology class of all places, but but yeah, it's not what you'd think. And while we're going with the labeling part, something that I thought has been interesting, because it seems like it's been specifically this year that I've seen things drop off sharply in the use of the term African American and the readoption of Black, because it's more about actual identity. That it's one thing to be someone of actual, like an African immigrant in the U.S. and someone who has grown up with the actual, Black American identity is different.
Have you heard of ADOS?
No.
African Descendants of Slavery.
Okay.
So, and who was it? It was oh God. He's an old MTV VJ. He was on the Joe Rogan podcast, and he's one of those, he's one of those personalities that considers himself woke. And when he stumbled upon the ADOS, that's like become his thing. But what I've also noticed too is, and this originally goes back to when I first lived here in Jacksonville. I had a neighbor. He and his wife were both from Senegal. They immigrated. They had a daughter. Their daughter, for all intents and purposes, I believe, was born stateside. So she was basically born and raised an American. And she was, ironically enough, trying to assimilate with everybody she lived around. Looks like somebody's taking the dogs out. Don't look at me. Go to the door. The door. You're still looking at me. The door. Is that you? You have got to be a little more expeditious. This is taking way too long. As I was saying, so they were from Senegal, and we would get to talking every now and again, mainly because I would help him out with his yard work, because I guess where he grew up. My one dog just gets so excited. I guess where he grew up, yard work wasn't a really big thing. I mean, it was so bad that, like, even in his backyard, he had saplings starting to grow because he just had neglected his yard so much that saplings were growing in his yard. And I was like, oh my God, you got to let me help you with this.
Nature was healing.
Oh God. So we started having conversations, and, he decided to start poking me to see where I stood on certain issues. And I'm going to take him and I'm going to piggyback onto when I was stationed in Columbus. One of the guys I served with, he was a reservist. He was from Ghana. So him and his parents were both from Ghana. His whole family was from Ghana. I don't know if they were full-blown immigrants. I don't remember the story. But great guy. Well-spoken, so on and so forth. And between the two of them, they would share stories with me about what it's like to actually be a legit African. I'm from Africa, okay? I speak the language. I'm literally from there. I think my neighbor from Senegal, I can't remember if Senegal is one of those countries where they play, long sleeve, short sleeve, but, and I'm guessing you get the reference. Basically what they were saying is, within the American Black community, whether that's ADOS or you're several generations removed, born free, I don't know, just that, like, legit Black Americans and the self-induced Black culture within America while they want to maintain some sort of inherent pride to Mother Africa, it's like when they're confronted by real Africans, it's like they're, and it's so funny how like real, and Prager University has done a video on this, how like immigrated Africans, post Civil War, etc., are like, what is your problem? What are you complaining about? Do you have any idea what it is
There's
like anywhere else but here?
and I mean there's legit friction that we see in Columbus. If you remember how, for whatever reason in Somalia, it appears that people were told like that Columbus is the land of milk and honey. Like I don't know exactly what happened, but you get into the North End in Columbus, and I mean it's legitimately like a little Somalia kind of situation. And the interesting part is that there's friction between the Somalians and between, especially if you get to like predominantly black gang activity in Columbus. Not that there's like a ton of gangs, but it exists. But I know that there is actually friction, and it's a policing problem because of it. Of if and I guess to that part, if we're gonna look at that, it's more about cultural identity than anything. That I and it makes sense of people coming from who have actually immigrated rather than the whole thing of America landing on them. I get it.
Yeah.
Like it sucks that that happened. I don't want to actually like bring light to it, but that's one of the unfortunate consequences of interjecting humor into pretty much everything. But which is what I do. But that otherwise, like the fact that people have different cultural identities within one country, within one city, and we just bring it all together and we figure out what happens next. It's wild though, because I've seen some people, I've known plenty of white people who are confused, that they get into the whole thing of well, I don't get it, they all look the same. And which with that part, if you say that part, that should always be kind of a keyword of maybe you should reevaluate how you're viewing people. But to their point, as far as their own confusion, and that's from a standpoint of ignorance, absolutely. But
Yeah.
that yes, you can get people who look the same. Do I get along with all white people? Nope. I'm great at not getting
Yeah.
along with them, and it doesn't matter what country of origin they had. Although I love arguing with British people, but that's for its own reasons.
Yeah.
We can touch on the monarchy later.
Well, to kind of establish maybe a personal identity, obviously I can't help the way I was born. I was born white, I was born male, and I was also born heterosexual. On very rare occasions, I may be able to identify a handsome man. Like I could obviously identify that, if it was, me, Chris Evans, and Chris Hemsworth, I'm going to get the short end of the stick. Okay. I can make that leap. I also think you have to be racist as hell to not want to taste the rainbow. I look at women like Skittles. Okay, before I got married, beauty exists in every color, or as I put it, every flavor. And before I got married, I really wanted to taste the rainbow. And you have got to be racist as hell to not want to do that. It's funny you mentioned that whole thing, they all look alike. It's been my legitimate experience when I've come across people that are like legit from Africa. They are a darker chocolate, a much darker chocolate, where, in my opinion, people that are American are a milkier chocolate. To include, you can sometimes find.
Your choice of terms. Like I know where you're coming from, but it's.
Well, you talk about Northern Columbus, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like this little Somalia.
Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but do they not just seem to be a shade darker?
Yeah. Well, generally speaking, like if you're meeting someone who actually is from Africa, are they darker? Like there's, and I don't know. I don't
It's
actually know if
melanin.
but I don't actually know if I've met anyone where that's been like unclear, or I've been like incorrect in my. I mean, usually the accent's the big giveaway, but
Yeah.
but I can't think of too many times where because I worked one of the pharmacies that I worked in was in the North End, so it was serving basically our two big populations were like the elderly and Somalians, and amongst the Somalian population, I'm like really trying to think if there was a time that there was anyone who like amongst their children, or if it really is just because of exposure to like more sunlight while you're in Africa, like that would make sense, but I don't actually know that part. And I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing.
It's just
But
an observation.
exactly.
So, me personally, I don't discriminate based on that. I do discriminate based on conduct, which I use to determine character. And I'm pretty even keeled. If you wish to conduct yourself in accordance with a stereotype, and you're doing a really, really good job of conducting yourself in accordance with that stereotype, I'm probably going to make some judgments. Now, how I act, I tend to be a bit reserved, but internally I'd be like, okay, well, so far walking like a duck, talking like a duck, looks like a duck, sounds like a duck. I mean, still might be a duck, but we know from experience there's several thousand different species of mallards. So before I make a determination on the actual genetic code, let me get to know the person. And tragically, in some cases, the stereotype fits. In other cases, the stereotype is there, but doesn't always fit. It's just, unfortunately, depending on who you're dealing with, there are certain things with culture. And you and I did this in our very first discussion that bounced all over the place. Within the United States, we have multiple variations of culture, whether it's Southern culture, black, white, whatever, whether you have Pacific Northwest culture, California culture and the different areas of California, Midwest culture, or like the Minnesota, hey, hey, hoser, hey, where it's very Canadian-esque.
Yeah.
Boston, New York. There's different nuances to certain areas of the United States that can be related to culture. So sometimes that can play into a stereotype. And just because somebody matches a stereotype doesn't always necessarily make them negative. It's just sometimes it's just, I don't want to say a product of their upbringing, but maybe a product of their surroundings. And I would say I directly associate that more so with maybe appearance and conduct. But sometimes people go out of their way to represent the most absolute worst of a stereotype. And that's how I tend to make my judgments, while I do leave room for opportunity to get to know somebody. That being said, to kind of fast forward this thing back on track, get the train, going in its proper direction.
Yeah.
I opened up stating some observations from the 90s. So if we fast forward, right, you fast forward to the 2000s. From 2008 until 2016, we had President Barack Obama, who, if you're being accurate, has a white mother and a legit African father. Therefore, he was black in appearance. For all intents and purposes, he was a black man, a black president, because so many people put such emphasis on his looks, his appearance. And I think that's a very easy thing to say. And I think that's very genuine. A lot of people, to this day, he's still referred to as the first black president. He's not referred to as the first mixed president. He's referred to as the first black president. Now, I'm trying to be very careful, because whether it's purely coincidental, whether he legitimately had anything to do with it, I'm not willing to assign blame. What I'm saying is the resurgence of the discussion and the suggestion of racism, and then this new thing, systemic racism. It all used to be just racism, but then we had to add this new term, systemic racism. And BLM, and I don't know if Antifa was a byproduct of the Obama era, or if that was
that really, everything I think of with Antifa has been just a direct reaction to the Trump administration.
Okay. And again, he gets labeled a racist with minimal to no proof. But as long as somebody said it and then got enough people to repeat it, you can establish that as fact.
And it's that part. I have really mixed feelings on that part of like when people go into the whole thing of Trump being a racist. Do I believe that he's really a racist? I don't really think that he is. Like if I'm just taking it, completely just from my heart on that whole thing of, all right, does he really? I mean, he's not going out of his way to be really sensitive. Do I feel like he's done anything directly the way that he's said that's like really benefiting, uh, any black people at all? Like I don't think that he's really done anything great. But I think in general, that's just a reflection of his overall. My view on his leadership is he's largely been ineffective. So he is what he is, and people blame him so much for things. It's like there isn't really all that much that happened. That's why even
Yeah.
for it was mostly my more progressive friends who were freaking out over him, and that there were plenty of other people who were going more in the direction of I'd rather vote for Trump than Biden because I don't like what I see attached to him. But
Well, yeah,
we're going to end up off on a tangent on this
yeah.
one again pretty
Well,
fast.
you already took us there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I was going to pose a question to you
Yeah.
for a little exercise, if we can do it accurately.
All
Would
right.
you rather take the pro or the con position?
Sure,
Like,
let's go. I don't know which one's going to be
okay,
which.
like if I play the white martyr,
Yeah.
okay, then would you be good enough at arguing against it? I'll give you an
I can
example.
probably pull that off. Yeah, let's see.
I'll give you an example. Affirmative action was designed specifically to discriminate against white people. So that's me taking on the position of the white martyr.
Okay.
And then you would argue against it.
All right. And yeah, if let's see. So no, it wasn't created for that purpose. It was just to create a level playing ground.
Okay. Then perhaps it has evolved into something less pure than what it was designed for, and now it specifically targets straight white men in attempting to get people hired outside the straight white male persona.
Well, that just sounds like a microaggression. Okay, now actually I'm going to break a little bit from this because I've had one of my friends, longtime friend, has for years was like really more of like hardline progressive, and he has within the past year gone like very moderate and reasonable. And what this actually came up with him was the whole topic of affirmative action and how it actually did end up becoming not so much a reflection of trying to create something that was, a level situation, and
Right.
that it was potentially pulling people too much in the direction of, having specific numbers met, like having something closer to quotas, which I like to think that it didn't really reach that point truly, but that things have been pushing back against it in terms of, all right, we still are going to hold up the part of everyone needs to have an equal shot. But if we have, whatever percent, if we have 5% of this race and we've got 60% of this one, and the one from the majority happens to be better qualified, that's who we're still going to hire. And I know that it was especially within universities that the most attention came from the effects of affirmative action, and that there were instances where they actually had been admitting people they were placing more weight on race. And
Right.
I think people have largely just ended up agreeing that that's not the way to do it. We need to still base it more off of someone's actual qualifications, but that everyone does still need to have the same shot.
Right. And I think, a lot of different arguments can be made from this. And this is just one piece of a much larger pie, if you'll accept
Yeah.
the analogy. So if we stick with the affirmative action topic for just one moment here.
Mhm.
Um, so, okay, several years, to include several decades ago, possibly into the 70s, 80s, maybe even the 90s, before there was this massive shift in culture. Um, because you have certain people within the Black community that have spoken out against this, specifically with naming. Before, you could have two William Smiths on an application. All right, so okay, I got two candidates, William Smith and William Smith, and they could either both be white, both be black, one's black and one's white. In which case, just based on name alone, you don't know. So then you could literally review the candidate. Now, if you don't ask anything specific to their ethnicity, then you can review the candidate as a whole. Where if we go back to that stereotyping, like when you come up with some name, like I hate this, I'm just going to use a really, really easy example, LeBron. You're not going to find many Caucasian LeBrons. So right then and there, you may trigger somebody's stereotypical thinking, good, bad, or indifferent, whether that's bias or not. Now, I've said that. I just want to leave it as it is, because within a culture, there's this thing, the name thing, and that may play into a stereotype. It may not. I'm not here to argue or defend against it. It's just I'm stating an obvious. Like, my name is Daniel. Do you find too many black guys named Dan or Daniel? Probably not. Just,
Yeah.
but it is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is what it is. And then you talk about like the Equal Opportunity Commission, which goes out and inspects companies of a certain size to determine, like their sole purpose for existence is to look for anomalies, abnormalities. Wow, you sure have a lot of, straight white men working here. Where's the women? Where's the women of color? Where's the men of color? And without going on a tangent, that serves a greater point. When there used to be things that needed addressing, we came up with a method to address them, whether we created an entity, a group, whatever, and we addressed them. But this is America, okay? We always have to do everything full retard. Now, I feel like I'm going off on a tangent, but it's all
I'm letting it play out. Let's see where this goes.
Okay. Like you take your Reverend Jesse Jackson and your Reverend Al Sharpton, and we had briefly spoke over the phone. Where's their proof that they're an actual minister serving a church? Not the point. The point being is they rose to fame and popularity marching with Martin Luther King for civil rights, specifically in the South, where the South was segregated. All of your former Confederate states were segregated. So they were marching for fair treatment. They were marching for civil rights. They wanted to be treated as equals amongst their white counterparts. And, like Martin Luther King's dream. Well, legally that happened. Whether or not civility and society actually played that out 100%, that's a different story. Legally, Lyndon Johnson did that in 1964, and then in 65 he voted in the Voting Rights Act. So legally, things have been equal. Well, if you've won, it's like that whole thing. What does a soldier do without a war? What does an athlete do without a sport? You have two men that made a career out of addressing racism who now essentially have won. So now they have to continue to find causes to, well, I'm here. I'm Reverend Al Sharpton. I'm Reverend Jesse Jackson. I'm here because something ain't right. So, like going back to the whole affirmative action, Equal Opportunity Commission, it was more than likely proven, because I was much younger when these things happened, it was more than likely proven that there may have been some form of discrimination. Now, whether or not that discrimination was based on legit qualifications or whether that discrimination was based on legit bigotry, affirmative action and the EOC was there to try to level the playing field. Now, the EOC is there to make sure that people are leveling the playing field. Where has that gotten us today? I've told you, I've gone on numerous job interviews where at least on more than one occasion I was told directly to my face, the only reason I got the interview is because I qualified for a minority category. That minority category was veteran. because 4.5% of the American population is a veteran. So based on that, that was a minority category. I got the interview. So in accordance with the EOC and affirmative action, they can check that box. However, I lost points and I lost value because I'm Caucasian and I'm male. And unless there was a sexual preference question as part of the application process, I'm also heterosexual. And that goes back into that whole intersectionality. So, unfortunately, we've created these entities like the SPL, the ACLU, the SPLC. We've created these entities to look out for injustices. But when there's no real injustice, they create injustice. I used to serve with a guy who was very dramatic. And he was very dramatic in the sense that, oh my God, you're not going to believe this. There was this major issue that nobody knew anything about, but I solved it, so you're welcome. Praise beeth unto me. And, I talked with somebody, and he's like, I see your point, but it worked. He reached the highest enlisted rank there was in the Marine Corps because of his ability to self-promote. Sidebar over. My point being is in wrapping this all up into this giant mess, I started with affirmative action. That was my kind of topic, right? But you see where it splinters off, right? Mm-hmm. So you have the Equal Opportunity Commission that ensures that affirmative action is being executed properly. Well, if it is being executed properly, but not enough people outside a certain social norm are applying for a job, well, then they sweep in with all these unfounded allegations, and now these companies are in panic mode. So then now they got to go out and hire unqualified people, and several people have talked about it. You have equal opportunity or you have equal outcomes. Okay, opportunity is based on your own God-given ability. Outcomes disregards ability. So I kind of went a little bit in a circle there. I'll let you take over from there.
Well, I'm trying to think what part I have to respond to on there. Yeah, I know. Now, I am kind of surprised. Like, one point that I was definitely thinking about there, when you mentioned that the topic even came up during an interview, that you were given the interview specifically to check a box, but that they weren't going forward with it. Even that is dangerously close to running afoul of the law in terms of even, acceptable questions during job interviews. Like, it's, if they aren't crossing the line, they are damn close to it. Yeah.
I appreciated the candor and I appreciated the honesty, because it was one of those where I was at least exposed to what I physically had to deal with in the job market, that it wasn't necessarily about my abilities, but, it was about other things. And to be fair and equal, this was when Obama was president. Whether that is purely coincidental or not, I don't know. To go back to my original observation, during his presidency, I feel like racial issues became another popular topic. And then because he was succeeded by Trump and not their chosen Messiah or their agreed upon Messiah, which would have been Hillary, I guess. Like, I guess Hillary was the chosen disciple to follow in his stead and preach the gospel, if you will. It maintained its fervor. And that was my general observation. Whether Obama had anything to do with that or not, I don't know that I want to give him credit as in a negative value. As in, like, now that I'm here as president, watch this. We're going to reignite the racial tension in this country. And that's how I want to go down.
Yeah, I don't remember that speech.
Yeah, and honestly, I don't think that I think that's just an unfortunate byproduct. But I couldn't help but notice that racial tensions received new energy during his presidency, to include after. And we had talked on a couple of different occasions, like whether it's policing, whether it's this and this new topic of systemic racism. And I feel like we can bounce all over the place with this. But if we're trying to be fair and equal, if you look back on certain things, the one thing I won't deny is whitewashing. Like when I think of Christmas, and my wife and I talk about Christmas, and we think about certain Christmas movies, and we think about certain Christmas songs. Bing Crosby comes to mind, and certain movies. And when you stop for a moment and you look at it objectively, a lot of our fond memories of Christmas, depending on how you grew up, belligerently whitewashed, belligerently whitewashed. And objectively, I can't necessarily say I understand what it's like to be anything other than a white person in the United States of America, and look at like Miracle on 32nd Street or any of these things. And it's like, where's everybody else? It's a
I
Wonderful
think
Life. Where's everybody else?
I think that a lot of that also came from it's mostly just as a byproduct of Christmas being, and even if we're looking at Santa Claus, uh, those are all products of Europe. So I don't think that there's much of a way that you would go back to the origins of Santa Claus. Outside, well, wait. So yeah, I was just realizing where I was going with Santa Claus, that he did have his assistant, as far as Pete, who's the black guy who stood in as an elf, and he was the guy you didn't want to encounter. So,
Yeah.
all right, so maybe that part didn't, but that portion of that of the story generally has been dropped off. I don't know of too many people who celebrate that form of Christmas, but yeah, I mean, like the uh, Christmas as a whole, if we're looking at the movies, the music, most of the classics in that regard are going to be more from an era before anyone was even trying to be inclusive at all. And so I don't know if there are any movies that I've seen where it's like, like Black Santa or something. Like
Right.
I'd be intrigued, but uh, but I certainly haven't seen that part mixed together. And I do think maybe that's something that's going to start popping up more. I don't feel like Kwanzaa is going to completely fill that in because it's its own thing.
Well, you did bring up an interesting point when you mentioned Europe, because I was listening, but at the same time I was thinking, and it made me focus on the fact that some people, I think, add labels where they're not necessary, because you have to argue intent versus impact. So the basic formulation of the United States was based on European immigrants. I say that loosely, all right, because I'm well aware of the Native Americans, but you had people fleeing Europe with this combination of European Judeo-Christian values. Because if we're being fair, balanced, and equal, Judaism and Christianity comes from the Middle East, which means between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, it's all the same people who look exactly alike creating these religions. It has nothing to do with Peter Pure as White Smith or LeBron, dark chocolate Jackson, using some stereotypical names. Um, so the majority of people who basically founded the continental United States were from a European background with European Judeo-Christian values, which is what formulated our society. And the most logical argument that could be made is, in doing so, certain people were neglected or left out. You have a giant Chinese Asian population on the West Coast because, well, they just came across the Pacific. That's pretty simple. You have the natives that were already here. You have the black Americans who, more than likely are ADOS, African descendants of slaves. You have the Hispanics or whatnot, which are basically just natives, but from the South. But I guess we call them Hispanic because after the conquisition, or am I saying that right?
Well, yeah, I mean, after the Spanish conquest of South America and Central America, that yeah, you end up with this whole Spanish speaking population, but
Catholic,
yeah,
Spanish speaking
yeah, and it was
population.
all exactly. It was all brought in by that Spanish
The
influence.
conquistadors, yeah.
Yeah,
So you
they just weren't as good at killing the natives as the continental U.S. was. We,
well, yeah,
they
well,
were pretty good, but we were better at it.
yeah. I just different tactics.
Right.
And I've had some arguments with people over that. Not arguments, but discussions where, first and foremost, you have the stereotyping where you had some really really violent tribes that their whole purpose in life was war. Where if the white man wasn't here, they'd be fighting each other because that was their whole mentality. They were like
Right.
like the Native American version of Spartans, whether that was the Navajo, the Cherokee. I don't want to mislabel anybody, but you had some tribes that were just vicious. So therefore, as people were literally migrating out west, west of the Mississippi, because it got to a point where like literally the known United States was the Mississippi East. So as people were migrating west of the Mississippi, natives were being pushed that way because the people that were settling the country were just flat out greedy, and they had the greater technology. They had the greater means to basically push these populations out. And as people were moving out west, every Native American tribe got this label. And you can't ignore the elephant in the room. Colonial greed, American expansionism, greed, all those things. It's not even a skin complexion. It's literally, we're creating this new country. Yes, you were here, but you guys are just not on the same level as us. You guys like to get high. You love to get drunk. You don't have guns. So therefore, we're just going to push you around. And, it's about as far as I want to go with that. And I may have oversimplified it, but it happened. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't my responsibility, but it happened. It's like if I go find an 8-year-old Japanese girl, we're 2 days removed from Pearl Harbor because you bombed us. I'm 8 years old. But you're Japanese. But I'm 8 years old. You're still at fault. Yeah.
Yeah. I can see where you're coming from there. At yeah, the whole thing. I think the whole situation is unfortunate, and it's just what it is at the time. Like, I not to sound overly calloused about it, but yeah, there's not anything that we can do about it now. I mean, Columbus Day isn't Columbus Day anymore. Like, we at least straightened that part out. But
Ooh, there's our
I
warning.
don't think. Okay. But yeah, I don't think that that's still really going to make anyone feel
Yeah.
a whole lot better. But there aren't a whole lot of people left to get to not feel good about it, which is that's possibly much worse.
I feel like this topic is too great to be solved or discussed in an hour
Oh yeah.
because there is a lot of nuance involved because of some of the tangents that are created from the straight line topic. Because systemic racism, the way I understand it, proposes that regardless of what's legally documented on paper, there's this like unspoken, in hushed words amongst certain civil groups or whatever. I may be mispronouncing that, but it's almost like white people have created a society, a secretive society like that of the Masons, and it's our job to oppress people that don't look like us. And the reason why I think you and I have such a problem with this is because um I I I didn't get to go to the meeting. I didn't participate. I didn't know I was supposed to be doing this to take the blame for it. Like if it is like this great white societal thing that is purposely keeping people down, um, I didn't know I was supposed to be participating, and I must have missed the meetings or the gatherings.
You know, at least my take on everything with respect to to systemic racism is that I think the whole issue is that it's not something that's spoken. It's something that ends up being reflected in the numbers, and that we have, as a result, some basis for, okay, something is taking place that's causing things to not line up the way that we would expect, the way that they probably should, and that creates at least a solid. I would say that it falls into into a safe category as being like a hypothesis of, hey, it looks like there is something that's occurring that would explain why we're seeing this pattern. But as far, I mean, if there's been a meeting, I would think that I'm white enough to be like privy to these things. You know,
And
I
I
don't know
said that.
exactly where we find those groups, but yeah, I mean, I get where you're coming from there of there not being, and that is the problem, that if it is a systemic thing, it's not because there are a bunch of rules that have been put together or something. If I ever encounter that, I'll be fascinated and alarmed.
Well,
But do I think that there is some undercurrent of it? Do I think there is some element of truth to it? I think it's kind of hard to deny that there's something.
I think, and again, my point of view, it's not necessarily, well, whether it's my point of view or not, I'm trying to be careful with certain things that I say, because in the age that we live in, people have the tremendous ability to take things out of context and like do these sound bites that make you look horrible. I think that there is systemic racism, but I think it stems culturally from within cultures, as in the people that are screaming that they're being oppressed by systemic racism are actually oppressing themselves. They want they want equal outcomes, but they don't want to take advantage of equal opportunity to earn outcomes. Um, so I think within certain cultural norms, within certain populations, case in point, try looking up any video where people discuss like black people discuss. I think Vice did a video where it's black people discussing Republican and Democrat, and you had like a handful of black people that were like pro-Trump, pro-Republican, and those that were not were like, you Uncle Tom, you House N-word, you coon, you like, give me your black card, you don't deserve to be black. And it's like, it was just fascinating. And you talk about confirmation bias, and I'm very open about it. And I think I was talking to somebody else. When I hear Democrat, I instantly hear Confederacy, segregation, racism, KKK. Okay, I instantly make those associations. And to give somebody an example, Nazi. Well, now let's say there's somebody out there. Well, hang on. The Nazis had 100 policies that made up the entire Nazi party. 94 of those were really bad, but they had 6 of them that were really, really good. So because of those 6 policies, national pride, proud to be German, German engineering, you're saying because of those 6 policies, you should keep the name Nazi and keep the party of Nazi, but just try to refocus your efforts. So me, I have instant confirmation bias when I hear Democrat, and I try to be as extremely objective as I can. I'm well aware that modern day Democrats probably do not represent the Democrats of the 50s and the 60s, and possibly even the 70s. But I still think some of the policies they push still create a virtual plantation. And in our very first conversation, I told you about some of the people I worked with on Toys for Tots who explained to me that our whole system is broken. You get all these benefits within the welfare system, Medicaid, food stamps, etc. But if you decide to get a job, and the moment you break a certain threshold, you lose all these benefits. But the funny thing is, these benefits are on par with somewhere between a $40,000 to $50,000 salary. So if you have between a $40,000 and $50,000 salary, you can afford the same level of benefits somebody on welfare has. But the moment somebody on welfare gets a job and makes like $15,000, they're cut off from all the benefits. And it's like, why would you get off the benefits then?
Yeah, there's no one's creating an incentive for it, and you'd think that so that's a really fun point right there. That with the amount that you normally hear, I usually would think of this as a typically Republican or conservative viewpoint of, all right, we want to create the conditions where people can succeed and they can do this for themselves, and that we want them to have reasons to want to be more productive and going in all of those directions. But we don't want to have, if they do have any type of social welfare, they'll be speaking against it. Ultimately, if you're able to say, all right, you made it up this far, we're not going to completely pull the rug out from under you. We're going to give you some sort of tax incentive. We're going to give you something that is going to make it so that getting ahead and being more productive than you were otherwise, that's a good thing. Like, because it's not its own reward. It's the same. I know that another topic that we were kind of discussing ahead of this was the whole thing of the 1% and taxing the insanely wealthy, and how difficult that becomes because they have their own systems in place of, okay, go ahead and tax my income. I get $1 a year. The rest of it's all in stock options. So knock yourself out. It's not going to touch me. And then it's just very difficult to touch either one of those as a result. That we just have a system in place that doesn't necessarily encourage people to reach everything that they can.
And you understand the use of the word conflation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like take things out of context, blow them out of proportion.
Yeah.
So like welfare programs don't necessarily discriminate. Okay. To include single motherhood, etc. Where people take data and they conflate it to serve confirmation bias based on the total number of, we'll just say, Caucasian people in the United States. The number of Caucasians on welfare might outnumber the number of African American and Hispanic American altogether. But when you compare that number to the overall total number of Caucasians in the United States, it's low. Versus if you look at the total number of African Americans in the United States and then compare it to how many are on welfare, it could be like 75%. And I don't know these actual figures. And so people take that data and they mold it to fit a narrative. And I think that's disingenuous, and I think that's dangerous because it brings up different issues that I think are greater at large. And there are certain people that do commentary that I listen to that bring up legitimate issues, but nobody wants to hear it. Like, okay, well, let's talk about historically black communities. Like within like the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, these are like black communities where the schools are like 90+% black. And let's talk about the overall quality of education. And, let's actually be a fly on the wall and look at how kids are conducting themselves. You have kids that just flat out don't care. And is that a cultural thing? Certain people are in a position to ask those questions because of complexion. But they're asking these questions and it's like, well, you're not part of the black community if you're asking those questions. Like, no, it's a legit question. Why does being a part of the black community mean that I have to go to a crappy school, receive a crappy education, and conduct myself in a piss poor manner, and furthermore, just not care about my education? So now that I'm uneducated, and then I'm sitting over here, well, I want equal opportunity. No, you want equal outcomes. You don't, and it's just one of those things where it's like, coming from us, but I'm listening to people like Candace Owens. I'm listening to people like Larry Elder, and they're the ones raising questions like, look, we actually care about the black community. We want to see the black community do better, but the black community has to equally want it. And it's no different in the white community. All right. We have people that are more than happy to, do these things. Like, I don't need my education. I need a fertile uterus, and I need a fertile, whatever, there's plenty of people, and I think that's a mentality thing. I don't know that's a skin color thing, but I think the bigger problem is when you start to analyze it as a whole, if there's 100,000 African Americans in the country, but 70,000 of them are on welfare, then that's a problem. You can have 500,000 Caucasians on welfare, but if there's 5 million Caucasians in the United States, then from a statistical point of view, it doesn't really, it's not the same. It's not 70% of a population.
Those topics get real interesting because that's where legitimately there are questions to be asked as far as how much after emancipation, after the Civil Rights Act, after all of these things where we were just trying to get, I mean, it's like it took us 100 years to get from emancipation to, you know what? We are actually going to say that you're equal. Like, and I mean, it's insane that was even an issue to get that far. But at the same time, how much in terms of all of those generations that took place during that time frame were screwed over because they didn't really have a chance to like claw their way up, or they still had society kind of fighting against it, that we're still looking at. I firmly believe, and I try to be optimistic about it. I still firmly believe we're looking at like decades before we start to see things becoming more equal in that regard. Even the funding of schools gets to be a mess. Ohio got in all kinds of trouble because the funding of schools was tied directly into property taxes within local areas. So guess where the good schools were? It's where everyone had more valuable homes and more valuable property.
Yeah.
And that, do I want my kids to be able to have access to good schools because I live in a good area and I work hard, and that, you do want those things, but at the same time, I don't want to have the viewpoint, conversely be screw everyone else. It's not that I don't care about everyone else. And that's, I think, where the guarantee of a free and appropriate education in the U.S. gets to be a difficult topic.
It's very dynamic because one of the original designs behind the Civil Rights Act of 1964 with Lyndon Johnson and his grand vision for the Democratic Party was ultimately we want their votes. We want them to vote, and we want them to vote Democrat. What we don't want is for them to ever be on an equal playing field as us. So the whole concept of his grand vision was, let's give them what they need. They want to be able to eat. They want to stay dry when it's wet. They want to stay warm when it's cold. So, everything wrapped up in that. They want some basic medical stuff. So all the social welfare programs that seem to benefit them from a statistical analysis, like I said, if there's 100,000 and 70,000 are on the programs. So what that meant was it kept them in a status of servitude. Okay, so it created this version of servitude from a different standpoint. Just keep voting for me, you'll get your welfare check. You fast forward to modern day Democrats, and a lot of them don't look at it that way. Is they're thinking that they're throwing somebody a rope. I see that you're down in a hole. Let me throw you a rope. The problem that they don't realize is the rope's not attached to anything. It's like the magician's joke with the thing up his sleeve, right? It just keeps going and keeps going. What they don't realize is they're not throwing them a rope to get out of the hole. They're throwing them a shovel to dig the hole deeper. And I think a lot of modern day Democrats don't quite realize when you keep supporting all these social programs, you're not creating a leg up. You're creating a greater dependency. And that's why I have to say I don't think modern day Democrats directly represent Lyndon Johnson's Democrats. I think a lot of them, in some way, shape, or form, mean to do good. And I'm reaching there because I don't know that for a fact.
I don't believe that I have a hard time believing that anyone, regardless of their political stance, actually wants to have anything that's not actually, from some sort of point of good. Are there bad actors? Sure, but that should be a tiny, tiny minority.
Yeah, and I think there's some unfortunate byproducts and consequences, like Joe Biden with his crime bill from 1992. I don't know if he was directing that at anybody in particular, or if he was directing that at a specific stereotype, not meant to blanket everybody, but just people who reflect a stereotype. But it had some devastating consequences. Same with Kamala Harris and some of the things that she did in California. I think what some people point to as systemic racism, as in it was done intentionally, I think what happens is you're applying intent where there was none. What you're doing is you're taking the unfortunate byproduct of an impact and then conflating it to, well, that was the overall intent the whole time. And I'm well aware the same argument can be made against me that, well, you're taking Lyndon Johnson and you're conflating. And it's like, well, I suppose you could make that argument if you wanted to, but that's going to support your confirmation bias against my confirmation bias, in which case, where do we meet in the middle? And
that's where I end up thinking that there's so much emphasis being placed. So when you're talking about these topics, a lot more of seems to be focused around the affiliated political parties, rather than what I'm more concerned with is, okay, what happened, and what are the overall facts, what are the outcomes, and otherwise, I don't even completely care what the political party attached to it happened to be at the time, because it's all parts of history. If Reagan were running for president today, he wouldn't even be considered a Republican. He would be, I would say quite safely that Reagan would be viewed as probably a right-leaning Democrat. That's about where he would land today, and that's just what it is. And that's where separating out those parts of it, rather than people sticking to the labels that they want for their affiliation, that you get pigeonholed. You start deciding too much based on that. Something that drove me crazy when I lived in Kentucky was that on the ballots, one of the options always was party line at the very top, the top bubbles, party line Democrat, party line Republican. And it would follow through every single ballot issue. It's just whatever that party happened to support. And that's terrifying. That's not
my favorite.
There's no way that you can agree with all of it.
My favorite is independent, but so let me see if I can close this out, and we can pick this subject up again, because I don't feel like I feel like we've scratched the surface and we started to get further towards the middle, but I think it's such a dynamic topic. I'm going to say this as neutral as I can, because I sincerely in no way, shape, or form mean in any connotation offense towards you. You and your wife don't have kids yet, right?
That's changed in June.
Yeah. Oh, wait, she's pregnant.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
Congratulations. Well, that's perfect, because in several years from now, certain issues will probably start to hit home much more. So it's one thing for you and your wife to take it on the chin. Okay, white privilege, whatever. Okay, white guilt, whatever. Or, party this, party that. When it's just you that you're concerned with, it's very easy to be dismissive. But like now, and you'll soon find this out, especially once they reach that age. Like I have my kids go to school, which means I put them in the hands of strangers to educate them. If those strangers have political opinions, if those strangers have social narratives, I have defaulted my kids to their indoctrination for a period of time. And then in the social construct, whether it's at school, out in public, I'm also in some way, shape, or form responsible for my kids, not just their conduct, but also I have to assist them in what they have to deal with. Okay. It's one thing, oh, you're just, you're just a piece of crap, straight white male with white male privilege. Okay, whatever. But your kids. And it's like, okay, stop. That's where you got to stop. Okay, it's one thing if you and I are having this argument, but it's another thing if you're going to start to impose things. And I mean imposition. I mean, you're going to start putting things on my kids that is going to limit, put obstacles, anything of that nature. Because my kids didn't ask for their skin color. My kids didn't ask for their genders, because I don't believe in that. And, whatever their sexual preference is, it is what it is. That's what they gravitate towards. That's what they lust towards. But on the subject of skin color, that wasn't their fault. And that's why I get so fired up about these things, because people that are literally trying to push for policy and people that are literally trying to push for, standardization of the social construct, it's my kids that are going to be impacted. And
Yeah.
God willing, we'll still be talking, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years from now, if this thing that we're doing keeps going. I'd be interested to see where you stand then, like when your kids are starting to go to school and, God forbid we're still doing this virtual nonsense because of some brand new COVID-32. But like, part of the reason I sit across from my son and subject myself to YouTube commentary is because I'm not necessarily listening as much as I'm paying attention to both. And specifically, he's got a couple of teachers that every once in a while bring up some stuff that has no business being brought up. And it's like, what does that have to do with I before E except after C? Okay. What does that have to do with a or an? Okay. You should be teaching him, if it's a vowel sound, A-N. If it's not a vowel sound, it's a, just a singular A. But no, I'm listening to these teachers and it's an indoctrination. And, things seem to impact more severely with me and resonate more severely with me because I'm concerned about my kids. And I'm very interested to see if that changes within you. If you're having a boy or a girl.
Should know hopefully this week. Should be getting those results back.
Dude, the results are great no matter what.
Yeah.
If it's a little girl, it's daddy's little girl. You don't feel weird or emasculated about cuddling and snuggling and smooching on. If it's a little boy, it's like, yeah, my little boy, So no matter which way you go, it's a win-win. But I'd be interested to see, like, within several years from now, when your kids are in school, if we're still having to deal with some of this, what I think is social nonsense, where you stand on that. Like, look, I just want my kid to go to school. I just want my kid to conjunction, junction. What's your function? That's, okay.
I think to an extent I got into enough of it with some of my teachers, especially on like earlier parts of my education, where I was more likely to, let's say in some cases, kind of rub them the wrong way, or for things to not line up. That like I can remember discussions about political candidates and who you should vote for and all of that, and that like you were really supposed to go with what the teacher was saying. And like I get what the lessons are, but independent thought was valued in my family, regardless of how much the teachers appreciated or did not appreciate it in many cases. But I think it's kind of hard to fully separate. And to that end, what you kind of started this entire platform for, that it's hard to completely separate yourself from your views and your beliefs, and that those are going to permeate other things that you do. You try to control it, but it's still going to get out there. And whether or not, I don't think that it's usually something that anyone's intending as being malicious, but at the same time, the jokes have already come up from my wife about, like, the parent teacher conferences that they're going to have to ask me to sit outside with a juice box or something, so that I don't start too much trouble. But
I think
it'll be interesting to see. I mean, with how quickly the world keeps changing.
Yeah, I think this topic is probably not done. I think because if you look back at the first one I posted, we didn't quite close anything, and I'm not saying we have to close anything, but I think there's too much discussion to be had in just about an hour to address all the different things, because I'm also not blind, ignorant, or stupid, although I could be equally accused of that. I do recognize that there are some signs and or symptoms that could provide the opportunity to think that. But I'd also like to think in the year 2020, and to include at least 10 years ago, so 2010 to 2020, we are way past those sorts of things. I mean, you have really got to be racist to the core to like not feel any sense of pride when, like, the US sprinters take the track and like just decimate everybody with the exception of Usain Bolt. You know what I mean? I mean, and I never think of it in terms of color. You know, like, oh, that Michael Phelps. God, what a great white swimmer.
So, yeah,
No.
no, I see where you're coming from. I mean, that would make for some fascinating Olympic commentary, but it wasn't that long ago that people really were thinking that way too.
I know, but
It was a thing. But yeah,
we
it's
are
not
the
something.
adults now. We
Right,
are,
right.
and we're well into adulthood. And I think we grew up in a completely different era. All right, we didn't grow up going, that Michael Jordan, God, can he play basketball for a black man? Nobody, I don't
No,
recall that ever being a
it
thing.
was yeah, it's the Olympics and we got the dream team, man. Those idiots let us put pros in. They're gonna pay.
You try playing one on one against Pippen and Barkley, you idiot. Yeah, you know, I mean, right, and that's where I think this discussion, it can't be concluded in this slightly longer than an hour platform, because I just think there's way too much there. And I also think there's only so much we can see as white guys. I don't know if women, white, black, brown, whatever, would see anything different, or if other people would. And I've been attempting to get other people involved, but sometimes it's timing, you know, it's other issues. But I have been trying to get other people involved, because the one thing that makes us unique is we don't bring a whole lot of religious perspective into it. We're not too, what's the word I'm looking for? Theopophical. Theopophical. We're not leaning on theology
Okay.
for much. We're more morally grounded. Like, bigotry is just morally wrong. I don't need the Bible, the Torah, or the Quran to say that's wrong. It's just wrong, you know. And like, kids are the greatest example. Who are you going to play with? My friend. Who's your friend? That person. What do they look like? Like my friend. Good answer.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I mean,
Yep. Absolutely.
so yeah. That being said, why don't we close this session for now so I can get it posted, and then we'll text each other and try to link up a time to maybe revisit this, or if the mood strikes me, I'll have something else. Because quite frankly, the biggest mistake I made was I tuned in while my son was doing his studies, and you know, I heard about San Diego and the white fragility and the sensitivity training, and how they're indoctrinating San Diego County teachers with this new narrative, and that's what spurred this conversation of the whole racist thing. And it's like, it's 2020, people. Come on. Come on.
Yeah, and uh, indoctrination. It does start sounding a little bit too much like we're going to have, like, political re-education programs or something. Like,
Yeah.
hopefully that's not the direction we're headed in. But I haven't
Yeah.
had a chance to look up what they're doing there. But
Oh, look into it.
sounds
Just
yeah, I'll be
look into
checking
it.
it out.
So, all right. To be continued. Hugh, once again, thank you very much. And everybody else, thanks for tuning in. If you did, all 6 of you. Later, brother.
Brother.